Welcome to the NCFCA Online Summit. My name is Amy Joy Tofty, and it is my pleasure to serve as the Director of Education for NCFCA, the leading Christian speech and debate league. Since 2001, NCFCA has empowered Christian students to apply and communicate their worldview with skill and clarity. Through regional and national competitions supported by exceptional training and curriculum, tens of thousands of students have learned to confidently communicate truth with integrity and grace. To meet your challenge, visit ncfca.org. We hope that you've enjoyed your time with us this week at our free online summit, and today we'll be giving away a full scholarship to the Forge Leadership Summit and an NCFCA sweatshirt. If you've enjoyed your time with us this week, you have just a few hours remaining to register for the NCFCA Online Intensive, taking place August 3rd through the 7th. You'll enjoy dynamic teaching sessions, breakout group activities, and instant feedback from coaches. And I do want to encourage you, parents, as you heard from Mrs. Shipe earlier, we invite you to attend with your students and learn alongside them. Registration closes at 5 p.m. this afternoon, so register now. To get the most out of each session, we want you to fully focus on the speaker, so we'll pause the chat box while he's sharing. If you have questions about NCFCA, join us this afternoon at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time when our leaders will answer all of your questions about our competitive opportunities and our resources. If you need technical assistance during the session, email summittech@ncfca.org and we'll help you as quickly as possible. And then if you have specific questions about the material presented in this session, you can submit them by clicking on the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer those questions when the speaker is done presenting. In Proverbs chapter 3, verses 13 through 14, Solomon writes, "Blessed is the one who finds wisdom and the one who gets understanding, for the gain from her is better than the gain from silver, and her profit better than gold." Certainly, we need wisdom when it comes to electing our leaders. In session 15, Analyzing the Value Resolution, we'll be diving into our value debate resolution for 2021. And that resolution is resolved. In democratic elections, the public's right to know ought to be valued above a candidate's right to privacy. Our guest speaker today is Mr. Hans von Spakovsky of the Heritage Foundation. As a senior legal fellow in the Heritage Foundation's Edwin Meese III Center for Legal and Judicial Studies, Mr. von Spakovsky is an authority on a wide range of issues, including civil rights, civil justice, the First Amendment, immigration, the rule of law, and government reform. As manager of the think tank's Election Law Reform Initiative, Mr. von Spakovsky also studies and writes about campaign finance restrictions, voter fraud and voter ID, enforcement of federal voting right laws, administration of elections, and voting equipment standards. Heritage's Election Reform Project examines not only how to protect the integrity of campaigns and elections, but to achieve greater fairness and security. Please welcome Mr. von Spakovsky. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Well, you know, this was a very interesting resolution. And I guess what I would say about it is that there's not, I don't think it's an absolutist proposition one way or the other. In fact, I think the correct view of this lies somewhere in between. I actually disagree with the idea that the public's right to know ought to be valued above a candidate's right to privacy. I don't think that individuals who are running for office should be required to give up their right to privacy, and neither should their families. And in fact, I think mandating complete disclosure of all information about a candidate's personal life will deter qualified, well-intentioned citizens from serving their communities and their country and keep them from engaging in public service. Transparency in government is extremely important, and I certainly agree about that. You know, the federal government has the Freedom of Information Act, which requires public disclosure of a very large, substantial portion of documents and communications that go on inside the government. And states have similar open records laws. And that's important because part of the duty and responsibilities of citizens, frankly, is to keep an eye on the government. I think people often make the mistake when it comes to disclosure laws that apply to citizens of thinking the opposite is true, that it's up to the government to keep an eye on us. No, disclosure laws are intended for citizens to be able to keep an eye on the government. Now, when folks run for office, they don't instantly waive their right to privacy any more than they instantly waive any of their other rights, such as their First Amendment rights to practice their religion or to engage in free speech. Now, the public certainly does have an interest in ensuring that individuals who are elected to office don't have a financial interest or conflict of interest that is affected by official actions they can take in their government positions. And in fact, in addition to the Freedom of Information Act and the state records, open records acts that every state has, the federal government, for example, has a complex series of ethics rules that also require certain financial disclosures, particularly of folks at the upper level of government. I myself was subject to those laws when I was a commissioner on the Federal Election Commission, which is the federal agency that actually deals with federal campaign finance laws that apply to individuals running for Congress and the presidency. And those are laws which, as you probably know, require disclosure of all campaign contributions and also disclosure of all expenditures by campaigns. But those laws do not require disclosure of an individual's personal finances. So in other words, if you're running for Congress, yes, under the law, you've got to disclose all of the contributions that are made to your campaign as a candidate. And you also have to file reports with the FEC of all of your campaign expenditures. But those laws do not require you as a candidate to disclose all of your personal finances and all of your personal spending. You don't have to disclose how much money you have in your savings or your checking account or your investment funds or investment accounts. You don't have to file a report on how much you pay monthly on your mortgage or on cars that you have on your loans. And it's important to understand that there's a difference between personal and private information about an individual and their families and public information, again, that's important to the job that you are going to do. Disclosure laws need to be very narrowly tailored when they apply to individuals running for public office, very narrowly tailored into disclosing possible conflicts of interest and not going further than that. Let me give you two examples of what I'm talking about and why this is important. And this applies from the campaign finance area where I helped enforce the law for 2 years as a commissioner. One of the requirements of federal law that's been there since the early 1970s, as I said, is disclosure of contributions made to a candidate. So when you make a political contribution to someone running for Congress or to the president, the campaign has to file a public report that lists your name, where you live, how much you gave, and who your employer is. Now, the problem with that is shown by the fact that when I was at the FEC, we had a woman contact us who had exercised her right as an American citizen to engage in the political process by giving a contribution, a relatively small amount, to a candidate that she supported. She was being harassed because among the requirements, as I said, is you have to list who your employer was. She worked for a large pharmaceutical company. and a very radical animal rights group had gone through the FEC reports with the disclosures of all the employers that individuals work for. And because she worked for a particular pharmaceutical company, they had gotten her contact information out of the report, and they were sending her threatening phone calls, threatening letters, because this particular pharmaceutical company, they claimed, engaged in animal testing of their products. She was desperate to have her name not listed in public reports in the FEC filings, and unfortunately, we couldn't do anything about it because the law requires public disclosure. She, in essence, vowed that she would never again give a political contribution. In other words, her ability to support candidates who she believes in and who push forward ideas that she supports was being basically ended because of these public disclosure laws. Another example of this that some of you may remember, although it now happened, I think, 6 years ago, is that I'm sure all of you know the tech company Mozilla. You know, Mozilla is one of the internet search engines that's out there that you can use. One of the founders of that company, a well-known, with a very well reputation technologist, was a guy named Brendan Eich. Brendan Eich was eventually became the CEO of Mozilla. However, it was disclosed online that he had made a political contribution to a referendum in California. This was the referendum a couple of years ago on whether or not the state should recognize gay marriage. He gave $1,000 on the side of against the referendum, saying that the state should not recognize gay marriage. Basically exercising, again, his right to support ideas that he believes in, or to speak out against other ideas he doesn't believe in. That contribution had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with his job or the work that Mozilla does. But under California disclosure laws, contributions, even in referenda, have to be publicly disclosed. This was discovered, and he was immediately intimidated and harassed, not only on social media platforms, but by employees inside Mozilla, and he was forced to resign, the founder of the company, because of a $1,000 disclosure. Now, the whole problem with that, the very fact that the state of California required such disclosure, is there really wasn't a logical reason for that. Look, under federal law, disclosure is required of campaign contributions to candidates. And the argument or the substantive reason behind that is you want to ensure that candidates, once they are elected, are not taking actions in Congress, for example, voting for bills because of who gave them money. That kind of disclosure argument makes no sense when you're talking about referenda like the one in California, because that referendum is going to be voted on by the entire voting population of a state. It's not, there's no elected official who's going to have a potential conflict of interest because they're voting a particular way in office because of a contribution made to them. And that, in fact, I think shows, again, one of the drawbacks of required disclosure laws, which I think you can also apply to candidates running for office. And, you know, this kind of forced disclosure has become a worse problem today, in fact, because of technology. And what I mean by that is contributions, as I said, have to be disclosed. But before the internet, if you wanted to know who had given money to a particular candidate running for Congress, the only way you could do that was to go down to the offices of the Federal Election Commission in Washington, D.C., and basically go through the paper reports filed with them. That has all changed because, of course, these days, all of their reports are online. So it's extremely easy to find that. Any of you watching this, you want to know if one of your neighbors has made political contributions? All you have to do is go to the FEC website, plug in their name, and it will immediately pop up and tell you which candidates they've given money to and how much, which makes it then possible, unfortunately, for the kind of harassment, intimidation, particularly on social media platforms that we have seen. And that's the kind of thing that can lead to people losing their jobs, as happened in California, not just to Brendan Eich, but to many other individuals who the political orthodoxy in California thought had given to the wrong side in that particular race. The other thing I think that forced disclosure neglects is, in some ways, I think it showed, the people pushing for this show a very dismissive attitude towards the American public and their ability to make their own decisions. And what I mean by that is that, again, while I certainly believe there should be disclosure by candidates of information that could affect their official duties, I don't think that extends to their private lives, their private finances, or in particular, their families. And to the extent that someone does not disclose that information, the voters can make their own decision at the ballot box as to whether they think there's something wrong with that, or whether they believe that was necessary for them to make that decision. And the best example of this I would give you is the current controversy over the attempts by the US Congress through subpoenas to get copies of President Trump's tax returns. They haven't been trying to get his tax returns while he is president. You know, that's something that the IRS has access to under a federal law that actually requires audits of all presidents while they're in office. No, they've been trying to get his tax returns from many years before he became president, before he was even a candidate. There is no reason, no public reason that I can think of that would make legitimate forcing a president to disclose his prior financial information, particularly his tax returns, which under federal law are normally confidential and cannot be disclosed by the IRS. There's no reason for that other than politics. Members of Congress of the opposite party wanting to look through his financial information to see if they can find something embarrassing about it. His financial tax returns from 10 years ago have absolutely nothing to do and have no relevant information to his current position. But that again shows one of the problems with the idea that candidates should have no privacy in their life, and particularly officials who've been elected should have no privacy in their life. I think there's a balance between how much information a candidate should be required to disclose and how much information he should not or she should not be required to disclose. And as I said, for example, in the whole issue of tax returns, for example, of presidents, presidential candidates, I don't think the public has a right to that information. I don't think a federal law requiring that would be a legitimate law. I don't think there would be a justification for it. And in any event, voters can make their own decision about that. If they think somehow that a candidate is doing something wrong or is trying to hide something by not disclosing that kind of financial information, well, when they walk into the voting booth in November, they can decide, I'm not going to vote for that candidate. If they don't think it's important, well, then they can vote to support that particular candidate. So I guess what I would say to you is, you know, the Supreme Court has long recognized a right to privacy. I think that's something that the vast majority of Americans certainly agree with. And while I do think you give up a certain amount of privacy when you decide to run for public office, I think there is a limit to that, and that limit should be recognized. So I guess I'll end there, and Amy, I'll be happy to answer questions.
That's great. Thank you so much. We're going to ask Natalia now to come on screen, and she's going to give a few great giveaways, and then we'll dive into our question and answer, of which we have many.
We do have many wonderful questions. Thank you, students, for participating so well in that opportunity. We have 2 final giveaways this afternoon, and those giveaways are provided by Forge Leadership Network and the NCFCA. So our winner of the Forge Leadership Network Scholarship for their 2021 online summit is Jennifer Castillo. So Jennifer, go ahead and send us an email at summittech@ncfca.org, and we will connect you with your prize. The winner of our NCFCA sweatshirt is, oh, the screen has disappeared. We're gonna find the winner here. I'm gonna keep you in suspense for just 1 more minute. The winner is Abigail Parker. Congratulations, Abigail, on winning this prize. And one final reminder that as we close out the online summit, we have another event next week, our paid online intensive, and registration is going to be closing for that event at 5 p.m. Central Time today. We have limited spots. Last I checked, we had 22 spots for speech and policy debate and 20 spots for Lincoln Douglas value debate. So if you're ready to continue the transformation that you've begun through the free online summit, participate in the online intensive. You're going to have great instruction from many of the coaches and speakers that have already been with you this week. And then you will also follow each instructional session with coaching activities and small group sessions. So you'll actually be on camera, up and talking, even here via Zoom, and we'll be coaching you through that process. If you're interested, please visit ncfca.org/intensive, and we look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you so much, Natalia. Okay, Mr. von Spakovsky, one of the things that our debaters have to do is they have to define their key terms. So as we talk about a candidate's right to privacy, can you give us any idea of, are there laws that speak to that, or how would you define a candidate's right to privacy?
Well, I don't think there's a law that, I'm not aware of a law that that lays that out that starkly, the right to privacy. I think what you have to do is you have to look at the, well, 2 things. The disclosure laws when someone is running for office. There are disclosure laws when someone is a candidate. There are federal disclosure laws if you're running for Congress or the presidency. If you're running for a state office, of course, those laws don't apply to you. Each state has their own set of disclosure laws if you're running as a candidate. If you are elected, and those laws really define what your privacy is, because they say how much you have to disclose once you become a candidate. Once you are an elected official, in addition to the candidate specific rules that have applied to you, once you are an elected official, there are certain ethics disclosure statutes that apply to you. Federal employees, for example, not all federal employees, but federal employees in the upper management and above level, for example, have to file certain financial disclosure forms in which they have to list, for example, their investments in stocks, their investments in mutual funds and things like that. State laws vary greatly on this. And again, those state laws, depending on how much they say that you have to disclose as a public official, really define where your disclosure ends and where your privacy starts.
So from an election standpoint, unless there is a law saying you have to disclose it, then we defer to the privacy rights of an individual. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. And again, just to quickly go back to tax returns, there is no federal law that requires presidential candidates to disclose their tax returns. Mm-hmm. That has been done by some presidential candidates in the past, but that was their own choice and their own decision to do that.
Okay. So then on the opposite side, as we look at the public's right to know, are there any laws or undergirding philosophies in American civilization that would lend us toward the public's right to know?
Well, yeah, there are a lot of well, they call themselves campaign reform organizations in Washington. I think they have I think they, in too many ways, want to restrict too much the rules in running for campaigns. But they believe in full disclosure, and they push for full disclosure. They don't believe that candidates should have any privacy rights whatsoever. Most of them believe that you should have a complete disclosure of all of your personal finances, for example. And some of them even believe that your immediate family, who may have absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with your politics and what you do in your job, should also have to do complete financial disclosure. So there's a very big gap between the two sides of this question.
That's great. And our resolution does specify in democratic elections. So one of our students would like to know, since we're not a full democracy, does this resolution even truly apply to the United States of America?
Well, I guess I would. We are a republic, but I have to say, actually, we're more of a democracy than folks who say that often try to point to Europe. To the members of the European Parliament. We actually are much more of a democracy than they are for example, when it comes to the presidential race. And let me tell you why. Yes, we have an electoral college that we use to elect our president. But when you go to the voting booth, you are voting for a slate of presidential electors who have pledged to vote either for the Democratic or the Republican candidate. And so we are really directly electing the President of the United States. That's very different from all of the countries in the European Union, the ones people always point to, because there, the chief leader of those countries is a prime minister. No one in those countries votes for that prime minister or for prime minister candidates. They vote for members of parliament, and it's members of parliament who then pick who the prime minister and the leader of the country is. So I guess I would disagree. Yes, we are a democratic republic, but I actually think we're more of a democracy than almost any other country, certainly any country that has a parliamentary system.
That's great. And when we think about the public's right to know, what are some of the things that they might find out about an elected official or somebody that is running to become an elected official? What are some of the things that are essential for them to know before they place their ballot? So if we want to have virtuous leaders, what are some of the aspects that the public should be able to know about before they place their vote?
Well, that's a very tough question. And I would tell you, actually, I probably pretty much agree with the laws that require a candidate to disclose his campaign contributions. But I don't really think that the public has a right to know, if I decide to run for office, how much my salary was at my last job, or how much the value of my house is where I live, or how much income my wife may make. I really draw the line between those kind of personal and private financial details and the money that's involved in campaigning. And I would also say just one quick thing about this, which is that campaign reformers are always talking about how important it is that there's complete disclosure of the contributions made to candidates. I often, when I give speeches or debate, I engage in debates on this issue, I have on numerous occasions asked everybody in the audience, how many of you, before you went into the voting booth, before you decided who you would vote for president, or who you were going to vote for the US Senator in your state, how many of you went to the website of the Federal Election Commission and first pulled up the report on who had given contributions to the candidate? Nobody cares. All the voters, all the people who voted, almost no one has ever done that. And why is that? because they're picking candidates based on what the candidates say, what their gut reactions are to the candidates and the issues and how they want to solve our problems. The average voter, I have found, doesn't really care who has made contributions to those particular candidates, and that doesn't affect their choice of who they want to have win.
So the people who do contact the Federal Election Commission and they are looking for that information, what do you feel like their motivation is that compels them to do so?
Well, often it's reporters looking for some kind of information that they think will be embarrassing. And frankly, it's opposition researchers. Mm-hmm. One of the most deceptive forms of that you'll see often is, remember I said that when you make a contribution to a federal candidate, you have to list who your employer is. And so you'll often see newspaper stories saying, oh, this particular candidate has received, $1 million in contributions from XYZ Corporation. Because what they did is they went through the list and they found all the individual employees who work for XYZ Corporation who decided to give the money. Well, that's a totally deceptive media report, because corporations, it wasn't a corporation, XYZ Corporation, that gave any money to the candidate. In fact, corporations are banned from contributing directly to candidates. It was individual employees who made their own decision to contribute. And that's one of the deceptive ways that this kind of disclosure information is sometimes used.
Very good. So that's talking a lot about campaign finance. Are there other types of information that is really necessary, such as medical records or criminal records? Are there things that the public has a right to know?
I think the only medical records that the public might have a right to are medical records about a condition that could affect the candidate's performance in office. But other medical conditions, again, all of us have medical things we might not want disclosed, and I don't think that the fact that we're running for office suddenly entitles the public to know every malady we've had in our life, which is unfortunately what some people push for. So again, I don't think that's a requirement, or shouldn't be a requirement, unless it is so serious that it could affect your time in office.
Okay. So when we think about these things, these are the policy level. So what are the laws that affect the right to privacy? What are the laws that affect the public's right to know? What are the values that underlie those decisions? So when we talk about this right to privacy, what are the values that lead us as citizens of this great nation to prefer that right to privacy?
You could have a long legal discussion about this, but I think it all boils down to one thing. And this is something that really distinguishes us from other countries. And that is that Americans all believe that we have a right to be left alone, that we have a right to be left alone by the government, that the government does not have a right to intrude into our lives and to tell us how to live those lives. I have to tell you, that's very, very different, even from countries in the EU, European countries. The governments there, particularly the socialist governments, are much more powerful, and they do not respect the right of privacy of individuals the way we do. So, like I said, I think you could have a long, complicated discussion about this, but I think that's what it boils down to. Americans believe they have a right to be left alone.
So these nations that value the opposite, the nations that say, no, 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 we need full disclosure, the public has a right to know, right. What's the value that drives that? Well,
I think it's the basic difference between a democratic republic and the kind of socialist governments you see there, which is in our country as a democratic republic, the individual is the most important entity in our culture and in our society. That means that our individual liberties, our individual rights are most important. And that means that the government is limited in what it can do. It cannot infringe on those individual rights and those individual liberties. In socialist regimes, which are much more authoritarian, there it's not the individual that's the most important entity, it's the government. the continuation of the government as a whole that is the most important entity. And if the government, continuation of the government is the most important purpose in your country, well, then you can justify anything that you do to an individual. Mm-hmm. Because anything that an individual might do that could hurt the government has to be stopped and prevented. And it also means the government, in order to prevent that, has a right to any information it wants about you and your private life.
So as we think about this current election cycle, if people want to get information or to understand the candidates that they are voting for, how do they get that information?
Well, in addition to the websites of each candidate, which of course have all kinds of information about what their beliefs are and issues, there are all kinds of reports at the Federal Election Commission that they can pull up on a candidate. You can pull up reports that will tell you who's giving money to the candidates and how they are spending their money, which sometimes can have very, very revealing information when you see how they are spending their money. There are also a number of other nonprofit organizations. OpenSecrets.org is one of them, that basically take that official information that they get from the FEC and they put it together into all kinds of reports. They make it easier to look at that and read. I mean, for example, if you want to know which candidate has gotten the most money from political action committees, you can go to their website and you can find that out if that's important to who you're going to choose as a candidate.
Okay. And are there any laws about privacy or the public's right to know in other countries that would be relevant to this topic, such as the United Kingdom or Latin America or France, any of those other regions in the world?
I can't really answer that question because I'm not an expert on those laws. I can tell you about the US system, but I really can't provide information or advice on that.
Okay, that's great. So we know that there are laws that don't force a candidate. Let me rephrase that. There are laws that have forced disclosure of certain information about campaign finance. And so everything else we said from a personal realm is somewhat off limits according to the law. But is there a point at which a candidate might choose to disclose that information to give the public that opportunity for that information?
Well, sure. And again, going back to an earlier example, there are some presidential candidates who have released their tax returns, even though there's no legal requirement to do so. I think other candidates, when they've been confronted with questions or issues, raised by reporters about potential conflicts of interest, have made disclosures too about that kind of information. Again, that's up to the candidate to decide whether or not they want to release that. And if they don't, voters can take that into account when they go into the voting booth.
That's great. Is there any type of external or objective standard to determine what is the public's right to know and what is not, that would be able to apply to a lot of different situations? What is the standard that tells us where the public has the right to know?
I'm not sure there really is a standard because the opinions on this differ greatly. And I'm sorry that I keep going back to the contribution issue, but you can really see this, for example, in how state laws vary across the country. Look, under federal campaign finance law, for example, there is a limit on how much you can contribute to a particular candidate. And of course, that has to be disclosed. However, it doesn't have to be disclosed if the contribution is under $200. Mm-hmm. Those rules vary greatly from state to state in state elections. In some states, there's no limit whatsoever on how much you can give to a candidate. Instead of I think we're up to almost $3,000 now because it goes up every year depending on inflation. Instead of the almost $3,000 you can contribute to a federal candidate like Joe Biden or President Trump. In some states, there's no limit whatsoever. If you want to give $100,000 to candidate, you can do it. And in other states, the amount at which you have to disclose the name is higher than that $200. The reason being that legislators determined that the idea that a candidate running in a multi-million-dollar costing race is going to take a particular action because somebody gave him a $200 contribution is just absurd. And so they've said, we're only going to require disclosure for larger amounts, like above $5,000. So again, it just varies from state to state on how much disclosure, for example, in the campaign contribution area there has to be.
That's great. Let's talk about the Constitution for just a moment. When you look at the
Sure.
Constitution, are there any principles that we can draw that advocate for the public's right to know?
Not really. Look, the right to privacy is something that is not spelled out in the Constitution. There's no amendment that says the public has a right to privacy. The privacy doctrine is something that has been developed in American law based on various different provisions of the Constitution. For example, I'm sure all of you know the police can't knock on your door and say, we're coming in to search your house, unless they have first gone and gotten a warrant. That is a requirement of the Bill of Rights, of course. That implies that you have privacy in your home from the government. And that's where the rights of privacy derive from, is those kind of issues. So it's a very general standard, and it's constantly under review. I mean, the best example I could tell you of this is because of modern technology. Look, there was a case, two cases just a couple of years ago before the US Supreme Court. One had to do with iPhones or smartphones. All of us have one of these days, right? Mm-hmm. And the issue that came up before the US Supreme Court was the police had arrested an individual. The arrest was a warranted and justified arrest. And normally when you are arrested, the police have the ability to search you and get anything you're carrying. Well, the issue was that an individual they had arrested had an iPhone. And the question was, were the police entitled to all of the information on the iPhone? Emails, files, everything else, or did they have to get a separate warrant to do that? Mm-hmm. Did the individual have a right to privacy even though he'd been arrested for his iPhone? The Supreme Court, all the justices came back and said, no, you have a right to privacy even if you're arrested. They can't search your phone without a warrant. Okay. Another just quick example of this, again, how the right to privacy keeps being evaluated because of the developments in technology is, again, Supreme Court had a case just recently in which the police attached a GPS tracking device to an individual. The individual had not been arrested. They had not gotten a warrant to do that. And they were tracking his whereabouts because they believed him to be a drug dealer. And they were tracking him through that. Again, the question was, do you have a right to privacy with your automobile, or did they need a warrant to attach a GPS tracker to it? And the court said, yes, you do have a right to privacy, and no, the police can't do that without getting a warrant.
Mm-hmm. So you referenced several different laws which require candidates and the government to disclose certain information. Can you list any of those out, or just point our students in the place where they could go to research those?
Yeah, the federal law on this is called FECA. That's the Federal Election Campaign Act. And I don't have the US code section to it, but if you plug that in, you'll find it. You could also go to the website of the Federal Election Commission, and there you will find not only the law that governs the Federal Election Campaign Act, the law that governs disclosure, but all of the regulations that have been issued by the FEC to implement those disclosure laws. And they have pretty good explanations of how those laws work and what it has to be disclosed and what does not have to be disclosed.
That's great. So as we think about the future, Mr. von Spakovsky, and we are looking at a generation of young people here who are working on their communication skills, and maybe, just maybe, one of them in our audience has their mind and heart set on becoming the President of the United States. What counsel would you give to them in this season so that they would be ready and prepared to answer that call?
Get involved in your local community. You will find that the folks who are most successful that I've met as public servants are people who didn't suddenly decide to run for a high office like Congress. They're people who got involved in their local communities, the county commission government, the town council government. That's like being in the farm team, a farm team for baseball. You learn a lot of skills there. The work that is done by local government is very important, and you get the kind of experience and judgment that are then needed for you to run for a higher office, perhaps for a state legislative position or even a statewide position. And then from there, if you want to run for a federal position, whether it's a senator or a congressman and eventually president, you will have had the kind of experience in local and state government that I think, again, is what will prepare you to, frankly, be a good president or to be a good U.S. senator or a good, thoughtful member of Congress. And believe me, it's easy to do, to get involved in local government because so few people do it. Folks are busy with their families and their lives, and taking the time, for example, to go to a county commission meeting where they're talking about fire and police services and zoning decisions and things like that. Most people don't even want to do it, but that's where you're going to learn the basics of how government works and, frankly, how government doesn't work and the things it should not be doing.
That's great. Thank you so much. Mr. von Spakovsky, thank you for investing in our students. To
Sure.
our listening audience, I do want to encourage you all to dig deep into the values that lie just under these political issues. So as you're looking at the resolution, as Mr. von Spakovsky indicated, there are individual values. And as a democracy, we oftentimes value those individual values. But then there are also values that support government and the community. So look at those things underneath and then try to relate those to what value should drive our decision making in this area. If you want to break down the resolution even more, I want to invite you back to our online intensive next week, and we'll be doing just that. So we'll be taking all these great ideas that Mr. von Spakovsky spoke of today, and then we'll be applying them to the resolution and walking through how do you determine those values? How do you weigh out the different between right to privacy and right to know? How do you find examples, and what types of philosophical underpinnings do we need to support our ideas? So come back for that event. Again, to find out more information, you can visit ncfca.org/intensive. Mr. von Spakovsky, thank you again.
Sure.
We are so thankful that you came and invested in our students. And we do have several students that would like to know, if they want to learn more about this, do you have other publications out there that they could research?
I've got some. I think I may have. Did I send? I thought I had sent you all some hyperlinks to a couple of articles, including something I wrote, for example, about the Citizens United decision, which came out to great controversy. The other person that has written a lot about this is Brad Smith. He's a former chairman of the Federal Election Commission. He's written a lot about disclosure laws, and they might want to check his organization. It's the Institute for Campaign Freedom, I think is the name of it.
Okay, great. And we will send those links out with our video today. So thank you, everyone. And for those of you who are interested in learning more about the NCFCA, please join us at 4 o'clock and we'll answer all those questions for you. For everyone else, we have had a great time with you here this week. We hope that you enjoyed your time with us. If you have any questions about NCFCA, I encourage you to visit our website, ncfca.org, to learn more. Have a great evening, everyone.